Hello everyone, this is Devabrata once again, and today I'm planning to give a session on constraint. That is a very important topic. Obviously everything is important, but still constraint, it is pretty much used on daily basis in real life. So constraint means in a word, it is something like restrictions. Restriction means you can put, suppose until now whatever we have done, we if anyone inserts some bad data into the database, we do not have any way to control that or to restrict that. So it by mistakenly a user can enter the same data twice, and by mistakenly the system push the same set of data twice or thrice. So we do not have any control over the database, like we cannot restrict those bad data. So today we will learn how to control those bad data actually. So that is being called as a constraint or restriction in one word. So if I go to our database and suppose we will create today a new table called, we can create any table. Suppose let me create a table for flights. So let me create a table quickly for flights, entirely new table. And with this table, we have something like flight ID that will be integer, say. We can have something called flight names that will be, say, varchar 100. Let it be or varchar 50 for the time being. We are using 100 every time. So let me do some changes. We can have something like source point, from where the flight will start, or start point, something like that. And we can also have something called destination. So first let me write this: start point 50 and as well as destination point. So let it be again as 50, and we can set some price of the ticket. So that can be, for simplicity, let it be like integer. So if I create that table, and now if I insert few of the data, like let me insert few of the data, like insert into flights values, because in all the fields people use database. It might be flight, it might be train, anywhere it is mandatory that you have to have a database, otherwise it is not going to work anyhow. So let me insert some of the data, like suppose Qatar 101, that is the flight name, say imaginary data. Obviously it is flying from Doha to suppose New York. Now let me insert another data called another flight, suppose Emirates, and it is flying suppose 204, that is flying from my place Kolkata to, say, Helsinki. Let it be in that way. Let me insert another data, say this time it is Etihad, suppose 553, some flight number arbitrary, and it is flying from, suppose where I live now, Tallinn to, suppose recently I went to London, so I can give Tallinn to London, suppose the flight is. So some imaginary data, let me take the last one, and it will be suppose a local flight, suppose Indigo, and it is Indigo, sorry, IN suppose 114, something like that. It is flying from Mumbai to Delhi, say. Some imaginary data, let me insert. So now obviously this data, if I insert, it will be inserted, and if I take, okay, sorry, I forgot to give the price. Suppose the price is here from Doha to New York, it is pretty much high, it is 400 euro, say, or any means currency. Kolkata to Helsinki is 350, suppose. Tallinn to London, it is less, suppose 100, and from Delhi to, it is 50 euro, say. for the time being. If I insert the data into the database, and if I check like select star from flights, so it will be something like this. Obviously, it is a very good data, but we do not have any control over the database, because if anyone can now insert this data twice or thrice, what will happen? If I check the data, obviously those will be inserted, because we have not put any restriction over our table. You can see this data has been inserted thrice. You can see that. Okay, so there is a way by which there are multiple constraints we can discuss today. So first one we can start with is primary key. So what is primary key? Primary key is a constraint that can be applied to a table to restrict null values and duplicate values to over some fields. So if I check, so what I will do today, at first I will drop the table multiple times and create it back. And after that, I will show how we can do that in the existing table itself. So it will be easier for you to understand actually. So let me drop the table now, because last time I couldn't control inserting the duplicate value. So now this time what I will do, I will simply after int, I can write primary key. If I write that, this table, in this table, let me create first. In this table, FID becomes the primary key. That means you cannot insert duplicate data on this field. Let me check. Let me run this query. One value has been inserted. If I going to insert the same value once again, it will be showing something like violation of primary key constraint. So cannot insert duplicate key in object dbo.flights, because the duplicate value, they have also mentioned the duplicate value is 1. So that means you cannot insert the same value once again. So same value in the FID field. So first time we are able to put some restriction. Obviously, if I now change this 1 to 2, the value will be going to insert it, because the restriction is on flight ID field. So it will be inserted. Let me check with providing some null value. If I provide some null value, so if it is going to take that value or not, if I execute, it is again saying it cannot take, the column doesn't allow null, because what I have written in the summary, constraint summary, if I say it like that way, primary key do not allow, or it restrict null values and duplicate records to be inserted in a table. Okay, so now there is another way by which we can create primary key. Suppose first, before that, if I want to create the same for flight name to restrict the duplicate data to be inserted there. First let me drop the table again. And if I create it back, you can see it has already given some red lines. And if I try to execute that, it is saying cannot add multiple primary key constraint to a table flight. So that means in a table, we can have only one primary key. Okay, so what is needed to control the data for flight names? You can declare primary key for both the fields, but not in this way. You have to change the syntax. So let me delete the word primary key from here. If I go at the end, and we can write here primary key, and we can give the name of the field. If you want to create it in one field, you can mention in that way, or the older way that I have already shown you how to put the primary key, means you have to write the primary key here. Then it also be okay. Also, you can mention in this way. This is very general way actually. Let me create it first. It will be the same thing. It will create a primary key on FID, but this time I am looking for the creation of the primary key over flight name as well. So in that case, I will be creating FID and FName. I will mention both the fields. And if I execute that, it is being created. So it means primary key can be created on one or multiple column. You can create it over one or multiple column, but it should be at the end of the day, it should be one primary key only. You cannot create multiple. So this time we have created over FID and F names. So that means obviously if I want to insert this flight number once, it will be inserted. If I click on that, it will be saying violating the primary key constraint. But if you put some other data, if you make some change, because every time now it will check the combination of FID and F name. So if I give another flight name here, QA102, then it will be inserted. Take a look. Okay, if I give something like 2 and QA101, then also it will be inserted. Take a look. So if I just run, if I want to show the data, you can see the combinations are different. 1 QA101, this is different than 1 QA102. 2 QA101, it is different. So that's why we are able to insert the data. Okay, so the combination should be unique. Now, if for the other data, obviously combinations are different. 2 EM204, obviously all of them will be inserted. But if you try to insert the same combination of data like 2 and QA101, it is already present, you can see. But if I try to insert that data once again, it will be saying the violating of the primary key. It is not looking even into this column. These columns are repeated, but still it is not looking into that field because we are putting the constraint on these two fields only. So this is the primary key. So if I take a look in the metadata of primary key, how can I see the metadata? We have learned that in class 3, I guess, because I am going gradually. I will not mention anything that we do not know. So one by one, I will be trying to develop your SQL skills. So if either you can press Alt F1 or you can simply write SP help flight. If I do that, you can see constraint, ignore this part. I will be describing this later. But if you check now, a constraint primary key has been created with a weird constraint name. Constraint, this is giving a constraint and it is saying constraint key is FID and F names. So these are being called primary key. So I can give a good name on this constraint name, but though it is not important, but you can give a good name on this constraint. I will be showing you how. And you can see another thing. If I go up in the metadata, you can see now FID and F names become nullable no. From the very starting, if you check the other tables we have already created, all the fields were nullable yes, means you can put some null value. But now you cannot put null values on FID and F names. So these are the changes. So let me proceed further and let me show you how can we put more restriction over the table. So if I drop, and first let me give a good name. If you do not mention the constraint name, it will be something bad. Means something bad name or weird name will come. So I am giving now a good name. Constraint C1. Suppose it is the first constraint we are putting into the table. And after that, I'm mentioning primary key. So if I create the table and if I show you the metadata, you can see now the constraint name should be something good. You can see constraint name is very simple, C1. Okay, that is the primary key over FID and F names. I hope it is clear. Now, if I proceed further and if I want to implement unique key. Unique key is also something same like primary key, but it will restrict the duplicate only. It will not restrict the null value. Okay, how to implement unique key? Let me show you. Let me drop the table once again. At the end, I will show you how we can handle the data without dropping. But for the timing, let me do that. So let me create, either you can write here again, start point, you can mention unique. If you mention start point and it's unique, you cannot duplicate this value twice. Let me show you how. If I create that table and if I go to the flight, suppose someone is inserting one QA101 Doha to New York flight. Okay, execute. Fine. Now, obviously, as the primary key is on flight ID and flight name, obviously these two combinations should be unique. We have already learned that. Now I have changed that. And if I try to run again with the same value Doha, So it is saying unique key constant, you can see. So now the problem is occurring with the value Doha, you can see. And the problem is being occurred on, it is saying the duplicate key is being inserted on unique key field. It is not saying primary key problem. It is saying unique key. That means whenever you are assigning like source station will be unique, you cannot insert, you are saying starting point should be unique, you cannot insert Doha twice. So now if you put some other values like Delhi, then you can insert this value. So the starting point should be unique every time because you have defined that. So that's why I am doing this. Okay. So now even you can define the same way unique, not here. If you want to include multiple fields, you can simply write it here. Constraint. Now suppose it is the restriction number 2, constraint 2. I can give a good name and unique key. I can create it over suppose something starting point and destination point. Start point and destination point. So the combination of start point and destination point should be unique as well. Same like the primary key, but it has one difference. Means it has one difference between primary key and unique key. Like if I am not drop the table yet, if I want to push the data as null, suppose some other flight QA103, if I want to push null, it will be inserted. Take a look, it will be inserted. If I want to push another data with another null, then it will be saying again duplicate value. Means I cannot insert any duplicate value including null. You can push one null. If I show the table, you cannot push any duplicate value. It might be Doha, it might be Delhi, it might be null. You cannot push duplicate value in this field, even not null. So that means unique key allow one null. So that's why I'm not written like it restrict null value. It is simply enough if I say it restrict duplicate value, including null. That means you can only insert one null value into the table, and it can be created with one or multiple field as well. Okay, and okay, let me first drop the table and create it back first. So if I now create it, try to create it back, it is saying, okay, key will not be needed here, only unique will be needed. If I create it back, you can see it is being created. So now again, if I try to insert, now this combination is unique. Let me start it from QA101, one flight. Suppose it is flying from Doha to New York, say. Sorry, yeah. So if I go into insert, so keep an eye on starting point and destination point. Do not take a look into other part. If I insert that, you can see it is being inserted successfully. If I try to insert another flight QA102 from Doha to New York, same thing, it will be giving the error. It is saying unique key constant, cannot insert duplicate key for the combination. It has mentioned already Doha and New York. The problem lies on this part. So suppose now if I change Delhi to New York, it will be okay again, because the combination I am using it is something different. If I use that, it will be okay. Now what will happen if I push a null? If I push a null, obviously it will be okay, because null and New York, we do not have any data with this combination. If we push something called suppose Delhi to null, and if I give QA104, say, if I push that data, it will be also okay, because if you check the table, all the data are unique. You can see null, New York, Delhi, New York, Doha, New York, Delhi, null, everyone is unique. Now, if I go further and if I push another data, in both the field it is null. It will also be okay, I guess, because null, it is the unique one. It will give the problem when you will try to insert the same record once again. The null is already there in the table, so you cannot push it once again. If you check all the combination, if you just focus on these two fields, starting point and destination point, you can see All the combinations are unique. Now, if I am trying to push null once again, obviously it will give the error. It will be saying like you have already a combination called null. So this kind of situation you cannot create for primary key. Primary key you have already seen in the metadata. Primary key cannot be means null. So if I check the metadata now, where is the metadata query? Yeah. If I check the metadata now, you can see for unique, we have both now in the table. So for primary key, it is saying nullable no. For starting point and destination point, it is saying yes, it can be nullable, but one null only, as I have shown you the example. So now we have two constant at the below, primary key and unique key. You can see constant 1, constant 2, and everything is defined here. Okay, do not think about this term clustered and non-clustered. I will give another class to show you means what is clustered and what is unclustered, non-clustered, sorry. So this is the thing. There is another feature of this unique key. We can create unique key multiple times. Let me create another unique key. Suppose another constant C3 unique on price. So price should be unique on its own way. So you can create that. So if I drop the table, so you cannot put any duplicate price here. So if I create the table, it can be there. Okay, I'm not showing the same examples. You can try to put the values into unique field. If you are successful to put the duplicate value into the price, you can let me know in the comment box. So if you are facing any problem with any query, you can paste the query into the comment box. I will be able to explain why it is not working. So it will be in the same way. Okay, so we have seen, we can see two unique key in this table now. If I show the metadata quickly, you can see there will be two unique key now. You can see we have three constants, C1, C2, C3, but out of that, two unique key. So if anyone tells you what is the difference between primary key and unique key, it is a common question asked during the interview. The first thing will be primary key creates clustered index. Though you do not know what is clustered index, I will explain that. So it is clustered and unique key is by default non-clustered. That part you do not know yet. But if I go further, you can also mention, like if I go to the summary, primary key can be created once in a table. One primary key can be there in the table. Unique key is two unique key you can create. Two means multiple, not two. I will say multiple unique key can be created in a table. Again, the third difference is in primary key, you cannot insert null values, but in unique key, you can insert null values, but null values as also you have to maintain like there should not be any duplicate. So you can include null values. So that is the difference, three differences between primary key and unique key. So now if I go further, if I find check constant, so you can put multiple check constant in your table. So what are the check constant? If it restrict some some values, I will say. So how it works, let me show you. Let me drop the table once again and let me create it back. Suppose we have those constraint. Now I am trying to put another constraint like C4, and it will be like check constant. So check constant, like I can give something like price should not be negative. At least it should be 0 or greater than 0. And if I create this table with this constraint, no one can insert some negative value in the price field. If I show you, suppose I am trying to, let me give some good values here. QA1, Doha, suppose it was Doha to New York, I guess. So if I put some good value here, and let me put some negative value like -50. Something by mistakenly someone has inserted this value. If I execute, it will be saying check constraint is failing. So we are learning how we can put some restriction over the table. We will learn more. Just for the time being, you can see it is saying the error in the price field. You can see because we are trying to put some negative value. But if it is a good value like 400, it will not give any restriction. It will be inserted. So we are restricting some bad data to be inserted into our database. So now if I go further, this constraint can be applied on multiple fields as well. So if I drop the table once again, and if I check, so I can mention like, price should be greater than 0, and the field should be and I can give FID should be greater than equals to 100, say something like that. FID cannot be a 2-digit, so it will be more than means more than equals to 3-digit. So now if I try to insert flight ID 1, kind of that, it will give me some error, because obviously it is saying you have to insert a 3-digit code. Suppose let it be 101. Now if I insert, it will work. Okay, so you can put multiple fields in that, but we can also put something like null. Let me try to put some null. Let me change some value, QA102, Doha 2, New Year, kind of that. So if I try to execute this field, it is saying, okay, null is primary key field. I cannot give null. So let me give something 102, let it be. And here, let me put some null in the price field. Null is being restricted by primary key constraint, okay, not by check. If you can remember, primary key controls a null value as well. So I am choosing price field to give null. If you are feeling like it is too fast, I will say pause the class right now and practice all the things I have shown. First practice, then proceed further. Okay. So I will not discuss any other thing today, only about the constraint. So you can take time, you can do it by yourself, then come back again. Okay, no issue on that. So now if I put null values are never going to be checked. If you can remember, we had one class called null. So null value are never going to be tested. So you can put some null. So it is not negative, it is not positive, it means it's nothing. So if I want to stop the null values here, so I can mention something. Obviously, every field I cannot convert it to primary key. So I can give something like and if and price is not null. I can mention anything in the check constraint. It will take care of everything. So if I execute now, and now if I try to give this value, it will be checking if the price is not null, FID is greater than 100, and price is greater than 0. Obviously, it will fail on that not null part. If I execute, it is saying it is conflicted the check constraint, you can see. Okay, so you can give many other queries like if the source station is Doha, then price will be greater than 400. You can give many things. You can restrict like check source station. If source station is Doha, source station, you are restricting it like source station should be Doha and price should be greater than equals to 400. Suppose this is the rule. Or you can only allow Emirates flights, means source station should be, or you can take the flight for, suppose Kolkata only, source station should be Kolkata. You can put or clause as well. But here, okay, let me close this one. So source station is a Kolkata and price should be greater than 100. Okay. Or you can even put some null constant as well. So it means it is checking source station should be Doha and price should be greater than 400, or sorry, it is not source station, it is starting station, starting point, I guess, sorry, start point, sorry. So you can mention start point should be Doha and price should be 400, greater than 400, or start point should be Kolkata, price should be greater than 100. That's all. That's all. You are not going to allow the flights from Tallinn, flights from Mumbai. You are not going to allow them. So if I drop the table, you can try your constraint as well. Any constraint you wish to give. If it is not working, just mention that in the comment section. Just paste the query, the structure of the table, and the value you are trying to insert. I will answer you why it is not being inserted. So if I execute, you can see now I can give only the flights from Doha and Kolkata, but I have to maintain this condition. So if I insert the Doha flight, suppose 101, and if I insert the flight price as 300, it will never going to work. It is saying the price should be at least 400 for Doha flights. So if I mention like 410, then it will be inserted. Just take a look. Okay. Now, if I change the flight number, suppose something, okay, QA102, and it is flying from Kolkata. And if I am giving something like 40 only, the minimum price is 100, you can see. If I do that, it will be also giving the same mistakes, same error. Like the flight ticket cannot be 40, which is starting from Kolkata. So you have to give something 110. If I now execute the same thing, it will work. Okay. Now what will happen if I give Delhi to New York? Delhi to New York. Okay. First, let me just, you can start thinking what will be there now. If I put Delhi to New York. So if I do that, it shouldn't work because I will accept data only for these two conditions, either Doha greater than 400 or Kolkata greater than 100. So there is no scope to take any input for Delhi because nothing is mentioned there. So you can create this kind of situation, but still it is not good, but still you can do that. Okay, so let me do something now. Let me change our database a bit. So let me create a good data now. Okay, apart from that, you can also mention, like if I go to any of our table, where was the table I can see, go to view, if I bring back Object Explorer, if I go to database, if I go to BW, if I go to tables, let me check what are the tables we have created. Suppose we have created some tables called description 2, let it be. So you can create the table syntax. I forget actually how I created that table syntax. So if I go to script table as, right click, go to script table as, go to create to, and if I click on this new query editor window, that script will be created because I think that script was created a long back. So I cannot remember even what was there inside that table, but it will be available in few minutes. Just wait for a few minutes. If I go to this part, so multiple check constraint I can apply to restrict some values. So there are some other constraint as well, like not null constraint that I'm going to show. We have something called a default constraint. What is not null constraint? By default, if you can remember when we check the metadata, if primary key is not defined, everything, all the fields by default are not null. Means by default are null. Means you can put some null values into those fields. But what will happen if I want to restrict null values only? I do not want to go for primary key. I do not want to go for unique key. I do not want to go for check constant. Those are pretty tough for me. I just want to mention that one field will not hold null value. That's all. I do not need to restrict duplicate. I do not need to give some condition. So it is simply, I want to restrict the null values. So you have to create a not null fields. I will be showing you how to do that. And what is the default thing? Suppose if anyone miss some value to insert, by default, some value will be inserted there. So that is being called as a default value. Okay. So let me go to this screen. This table has been created. I have created it once. So you can see if I create the table script for all the tables, you can try it for all the tables that you have created, student marks. If you do not mention anything, it will be null. It will be null. Now I will try to create some table with this option. That means let me create some table here. Create table, suppose description 3. I don't know what was that. And you might thinking, I have not used these queries at the time of creation. So these are the default ones. I will be explaining later. So this is the database name and go. I will be explaining that later. On primary go, I will be explaining that later. So in a good manner, the good best practice is to always give these brackets, but we generally do not give. Every one of us follow the shortcuts. So we never follow this one. We do not give this thing. So suppose description 3, if I want to create that, suppose let me create something called role, suppose integer, and I am mentioning not null. Explicitly you have to mention. If you do not mention this thing, it will always be null. So I can mention like some names of few person. I don't know whose name. So varchar, suppose 100, I can mention not null. So the name cannot be null. If I give marks and if I mention something new, let it be float. Float is a very flexible data type. You do not need to mention anything like 5.2, 5,2 kind of that. It can take every value. It can take everything. So here I have mentioned null. If you do not mention anything, it will be null. If you mention anything, you can. So let it be null, or if you can skip it for the time being. Or okay, let it be in that way. So if I create the table and if I check the metadata, you can see the role is not null. Names are not null, but marks are null. So that means if I going to insert some values here, insert into description 3, suppose, sorry, I am writing the correct here. Yes, correct. The description 3 values, I can give something like, if I put null instead of role, and suppose some name called Arya, suppose. And if I give a null here, so it will show like the role field cannot be null. There is no primary key defined in this table. It is very simple, but I have given something not null. So you cannot insert the value null into column role. It is clearly saying that. You can zoom because the font is very small. So you can zoom and check. You can see the value cannot be null. So now if I give some values like 1, then it will be able to insert that value. Because I have told like marks by default can take null, but role and name, it should be not null. So it is in this way. I hope not null, you got it. If I drop this table, and now if I create it back with another feature called, suppose if anyone miss role, so by default, the default value of the role will be -1. Suppose if anyone miss some value, we cannot put 1, 2, 3, so it will be -1 by default. If I put that, and here, if I forcefully give null, obviously it will not work because it cannot put null here. It is obvious, it is written not null. So I cannot put null. But anyone, if skip insertion this field, if anyone only mention names and marks I want to give, that person didn't mention what needs to be inserted instead of role. He just mentioned name and marks only. So if I insert that, it will be inserted because I'm not pushing null value into role. So by default, if you are not pushing any value into role, by default it will be 1. Let me check the table now. If I check select star from DESR 3, I guess, yeah. If I execute that, you can see by default it is -1. So default value is -1. I have mentioned that. So this is another, I will say, constraint. So if I check the metadata, it will be something you can see constraint type default. Obviously, you can give like constraint default. You can write in that way as well. But for the time being, this is the way. Okay. So you can mention some default value for varchar field as well. Let me drop it once again and create it back. So I can mention these things here as well. Let it be here. I can mention like constraint. Suppose C, so until which I have created the constraint here, C4. So it can be C5, it can be C1 because it is entirely new table. Let it be C1 this time. So I can create a constraint like constraint C1 and I can write default value is -1 for the field role. You can mention many. You can put some default value for the names part as well. So names part. If anyone doesn't give any value, it is varchar. So I can give something xxx for the default names. And you can, okay, let me give the different constant name. Otherwise it will throw an error. If I do that, you can see, sorry, some problem, something I'm giving wrong, I guess. Before, okay, I guess this will not be there. I guess so. Some mistakes I'm doing. Okay, let me try this first because I cannot remember that much of syntax. Okay, for is giving some problem. I can check constraint C1. Okay, let me check the constraints. Okay, just give me a minute. Let me check what is the correct syntax. Okay, or you can even check the same. But let me check constraint on default in SQL Server. Something. Suppose. Okay, let me check this one. Microsoft document itself. What is that? What I'm doing mistake? Okay, constraint something default 50. It is using the same thing. Okay, it is saying constraint. Okay, constraint is being added with the field itself. Okay, so what they are doing, they are putting this with the role itself. Okay, so constraint C2 default X. So I can put this here as well. There might be many ways. So there is might be another way as well. So you can put it in this way. So if I create the table once again, okay, there is already an object name. So let me drop that. Okay, sorry, they are saying the already constraint name is C1. Okay, you cannot do that because constraint is already created. Sorry, I passed a misinformation. So it will be C5 and it will be C6 because there is constant is unique in the table. It is not in the database. It is not dependent on the table. So bad information I have provided because there is one, I forgot, there is one table for sys constraints. I will explain those later, obviously. Sys constraints, something like that, probably, where all the constraints are being mentioned. I guess so, yes. So these are the constraints. I will explain how we can check those. We have, for the timing, we have created 6 constraints. You can see that 6 constraints mentioned here. So you cannot be duplicate that. So anyway, I will explain that later. Do not need to take stress. So, but the idea is clear, right? So if I do not push any role, it will be by default -1. If I do not push any value, it will be by default xxx. So let me try that. And after that, I will jump into the last constraint. So suppose for the marks, I want to put it something like 100. I'm not putting a role and name. If I put that, now if I check the description 3 table, it will be something -1 xx. So the default value has been inserted. So we have learned these 2 restrictions. You can try each one of them. And if you are facing any doubt, obviously you can check the Google, but still you can ping the query into the chat box. I can have a look as well. So these are just the conceptual things. You need to know how it works. Okay. So now the last thing is a foreign key constant. So foreign key constant means, let me go back to this table and let me, okay, where is the data? Yeah. So let me drop the table and create some good data. And I do not like this tough constraint. So I will be giving a simply price should be greater than 100. That's all. So let me create that table once again. Now, if I create the data, a good data now, for suppose Q1 flight, it is flying from Delhi to New York, or it is being like Doha to New York, kind of that. If I insert, and the last value should be suppose 150 because the constant is price greater than 100. If I insert those data, okay, I have to give a comma here. If I insert this data, these records, so 4 records has been inserted because I am following all these rules defined in the table. Now, if I create, okay, let me check the table. here. So if I create a table passenger here, create table passenger, and if I create like PID passenger ID integer, passenger name I want to include, that is probably barcar 100 or anything, and I'm not giving anything else. Okay, let it be age integer, age of the passenger, or many details you can put, but my intention is to put something flight ID, FLID, that will be integer again. So if I create this table passengers, and if I try to insert this value, insert into passengers, and suppose I am inserting few data like passenger is 1, passenger ID, and suppose some person called Vijay, and age of Vijay is suppose 40, and he is flying with flight ID 1. Let me check the flight ID. Yes, it is 1. Suppose he is flying with flight ID 1. Now I will be inserting some details of, suppose another person called Anil. Anil is flying. Anil's age is 35. Age is not important in this query, but still Anil is also flying with flight ID 1. Anil's passenger ID is 2. Let me put some more, like 3. It will be, say, Raj, and he's flying, age is 30. He's flying with flight ID 2. Suppose flight ID 4, passenger ID 4. Suppose Monica, she's suppose 32 and flying with flight ID 3, something like that. And the last record I will be inserting is 5. Suppose Prakash is flying with, suppose age is Prakash's age is 22, but Prakash is flying with flight ID 10. So we do not have any flight called 10 in the flight table. But how can I restrict the value in another table? Flight is a different, flight ID is in a different table. How can I restrict this passenger table? Because passenger table is something else. How can I restrict this bad value? Because there is no flight available named 10. There is no flight available. So how can I restrict this data to be inserted? Okay, let me first try to insert this value. It is successfully inserted, obviously, because we haven't put any restriction over there. But if I want to put some restriction here in passenger table, because every time I need to take a look into the flight table, we have to give some valid data here. So if it is cross table validation, then it will be called as, okay, first let me write it down, passengers. Okay, it will be called as foreign key relationship, foreign key, because this validation will be done from outside, foreign. So that's why it is being called as foreign key. So let me drop this table and let me do something like flight ID int. You can mention something foreign key, you can mention flight ID will be foreign key, and it will references the flight table. This is the table name, and inside that you can mention the flight ID, FID. But for the time being, we have flight ID not as a primary key, so it is mandatory flight ID will be primary key. Okay, so if I create that, it's okay, flight, not the table name is flight, it is flights. If I do that, okay, it is saying there are no primary key or candidate key in the reference table flight. Okay, so I have to make another change in the flight table, because this FID is not a primary key for the time being. So let me exclude fname from the primary key and let me create it back. So now FID is a primary key. So this is the rule, like the key you will be referring, that should be the primary key of that table. So if I execute these details once again, and now if I create it back, now I'm saying passenger, this flight ID, FLID should refer to FID all the time. And FID should be the primary key of the table, not any combination. It is mandatory. Now if I going to insert these 4 data first, it will be okay. These 4 data will be inserted. But if I try to insert the last one, it will give the error because there is no such flight are there with flight ID 10. It is saying foreign key constraint is happening. You can also make that name good, but I'm not showing that for the time being. You can see it is giving the error in this bad record. So I can delete that and I can proceed with this record. So now a clever person can think, okay, I have a good data in foreign table, foreign key, in those 2 tables, flight and passenger. I am maintaining all those constraints and everything. So if I want to prove SQL Server wrong, how can I prove that? Obviously, I have inserted everything. As per the rule, all passengers should have a valid flight number. All of them have. Flight 1, flight 2, flight 3, all of them having a good flight number. But what if I delete the flight 3? If I delete from the flight table, if I delete where FID equals to 1, FID equals to 3, let it be. So that means this flight will not exist in this table, but Monica will be taking that flight. So it will again create some confusion. As per the rule of foreign key, you cannot have a flight ID that is not there in the parent table. We can make it parent. We can say it as a parent table. We can say it as a child table. We cannot have a data in that table which is not present in the parent table. So let me try to delete that data. So if you define primary key and foreign key relationship, then you cannot delete the data itself. It is saying first you have to delete the data from the child table, then you will be able to delete the data from the parents one. So if I go to the passenger table and if I check the metadata, it will also giving a hint like here. If anyone wants to perform delete, it will be saying no action. Means they cannot delete the table. So this is the rule. Even surprisingly, you cannot drop the table even. If you try to drop the table flight, like you want to drop everything from the flight table, whereas we have the data in the passenger table, you cannot drop even because you are bound in a primary key foreign key relationship. So now if I drop the table passenger and create it back, I want to now create the table apart from flight foreign key references. I want to, by default, it is saying on delete no action. On delete no action, but I do not want to do that. I want to mention, I want to change some condition on delete cascade. If I do that, so what will happen? I will show you. I know it is pretty much for you for the day, but still, if I insert those data and now, okay, let me first show you what is the data looks like in those 2 tables, flight and everything. Now I will try to delete this data from the flight table. And remember, Monica is taking that flight 3. And I have changed one area only. I have added this part on delete cascade. So now what will happen? So if I delete the data flight 3 from the parent table, it is deleted. Wow. So if I check both the table now, it will be deleted from the child table as well. So if you mention this thing on delete cascade, that means it will be deleted from both the table. Okay. So that is the one thing. You can again change the data. So let me drop the table and let me create it back. And this time I can give something on delete, set null. Set null. So another hint to the database. If I execute, obviously Monica's data I cannot insert because there is nothing flight 3 in the flight table. So let me insert Vijay and Anil and Raj record. Yeah. So now let me show you the data. So it looks like this. Now if I delete these 2 record, this flight number 2, which is Raj is availing that flight number, what will happen? So if I delete the flight number 2, remember Raj is availing that flight. Okay. So if I execute, obviously it will be deleted. Now what will happen in the table? In flight table, flight number 2 will be deleted, and for passenger table, it will be null because I have given a hint like on delete set null. Okay, if I take a look of the metadata in this table, so you can see it will be set null. Okay, let me do the last time. Drop table passenger, and you can create it back like with this time on default, on delete set default. So set default, suppose flight number 4, I will set on default. Every time it will be okay. It will be, I can write on delete set default, I guess. And the default value of this table should be, I have to define like 4, say. I think it would work. Let me check first because I forget syntax every time. So now how the table looks like, obviously Raj data has been deleted. So I have only Anil and Vijay now. If I check the flights, only 2 flights will be there, flight number 1 and flight number 4. Now, if I delete the flight number 1, so what will be flight ID 1 here? It will be changed to flight ID 4. And obviously this default value should be present in the primary key table, in the parent table. Obviously you cannot mention like default 10. It should be there in the primary table, in the parent table. Okay, now if I delete flight ID 1, take a look what will happen. If I check the table, obviously flight 1 will be deleted. You can see it is 4. Okay, and here flight ID changed to 4. So that is a cool thing to work on. You can try in all possible ways. Take time, take 2 or 3 days to practice all those things. I am doing all those things very fast, but for you, you have an option of like pause button. Pause this, do one by one, it will be clear, guaranteed. Guaranteed it will be clear. So everyone has to start, everyone has to learn those things new some point of time. So you are learning this first time, obviously. So practice all those things, it will be clear. So I can mention for the very last time, I'm not going to delete anything. Now means I will create the table passengers and I will give some thing like on delete. Suppose on delete, I can mention cascade. I can mention on update as well. I can mention something on update. I can mention set null. So on delete, it will be behave like cascade, means it will be deleted from the child table as well. But on update, it will be setting a null. Let me create that. Let me create that. And if I insert, I cannot insert these values now. Suppose it will be 4. With 4, I have to insert. So now how it looks like, only 1 flight, 2 passenger with that flight, 4. Now, if I somehow update the data in the flight table, like update flights set FID equals to suppose 40, where FID equals to 4. 4 will be updated to 40. If I do that, what will happen in the child table? It will be set null. So if you are updating something, I have given a hint like set it null. You can also choose the option like on update cascade. If you choose on update cascade, these values will be updated as well to 40. You can test that. It is kind of a homework. You can test that in your SQL Server. So for last thing, if I check the metadata, I'm not going to do anything more. You can see here the constraint. You can see where is the constant foreign key. On delete, it is cascade. On update, it is set null. I'm not going to explain more about these things. Probably sometimes later I will discuss all those, but this is the thing. Okay, by default, both of them are like no action. You cannot update, you cannot delete anything in the parent table. But if you try to play with that, obviously you can do something. So now, if I want to put, I do not want to, the last topic, do not want to drop anything from the table. Means I do not want to drop the table because in one table we have a couple of data. Now for the existing table, if I want to put a primary key on the role field, or if I want to put a what can I say, unique key for some email ID. How can I do that? Every time I need to drop? No, I have used drop just for simplicity. But here I can create a constraint like I can alter the table. I can create alter table student, and I can mention add constraint. So for the very first time, I am introducing primary key on our student table. Previously, it was not there. So that means we can insert some bad values in this table, but I want to protect that. So I am putting some constraint like say, suppose C10, constant number 10, something like that. And I can put like primary key on the top of roll number field. So in that way, existing table, you can do anything. You can see, okay, okay, primary key, it is saying cannot define primary key constant on nullable column in table student. Okay, student table is nullable. If you check the metadata, role is nullable. So at first I need to change that, obviously. So I can mention alter table student. First, alter. We have learned that in DML statement on chapter 3, I guess. Alter role, it will be int and not null. I mention that first, I have to change that first. Let me try to change. Incorrect syntax, alter column, I guess I have to add. I generally do not remember all those syntaxes. Believe me, my memory is very weak. Yeah, so it is now being changed. Now I can add the constraint. Let me show you. Because it is no more nullable, it is not null. Now it is being changed. Now in our existing table from with which we are working from the very first, you can see primary constant has been applied. Now, if you do not like, you can delete it anytime. So I was showing you like how to drop a table and create it back. It is not required all the time. So you can simply write drop constraint C10. If you do that, that constraint of primary key will be deleted. In the similar way, you can add foreign key, you can add primary key, you can add unique key, everything you can add in this table. If you are facing any issue with the syntax, just let me know. I can help you with that. Okay, but the concept should be clear. It is not about the syntax. The concept should be clear how it works, because syntaxes are always available in Google. So yep, that's all over the constraint. I know it is pretty much for you for one day. I will suggest practice everything. It will be clear. That's all for the day. Bye. See you again with something new topic. Bye.